Shalom, this is Daniel Stern of the Netivyah Bible Instruction Ministry. I'm coming at you from our offices in downtown Jerusalem, and today I want to talk about a very controversial, very polarizing subject, and that is, in fact, the controversial and polarizing subjects that exist, and why they exist, and what they say, and what they mean. And I always find it very distressing that you can take almost any issue and find millions and hundreds of millions and billions of people on both sides of an argument, and none of them are stupid. None of them are uneducated. None of them are dumb. Maybe some of them are, but basically there are smart, educated people on both sides of an opinion. For example, global warming. There's a lot of people that say that it's happening and it's affected by humans and that we have to stop, and if we don't, we'll destroy the world. And there's a lot of people that are saying it's a natural thing, it happens on its own, it hasn't been recorded enough, it'll change on its own, humanity's effect is minimal, whatever. This isn't going to be the subject that we talk about now, although you can feel free to share your opinion in the comments. But the point is that there are millions and hundreds of millions and billions of smart, educated people on both sides of that opinion. And they have the same information, or at least they have access to the same information. They have time, they have energy, and they reach polar opposite opinions. And the same is true in politics, and in religion, and regarding sex gender issues, and regarding economic directions, socialism versus free market, capitalism, big government, small government, oil, coal, atomic. In all kinds of subjects, you have millions of people on both sides who have access to the same information and reach polar opposite opinions, and will fight to the death about these opinions. And I can share with you my thoughts and give you my opinions, but just because I have them doesn't mean they're correct. Doesn't mean that there isn't someone who believes exactly the opposite as I do, who has access to the same information. And this is why in today's age, in modernity, when we have so much information, we need to, I don't even want to say limit our information, but there's an overload. You can find information about everything. You can say vaccines cause autism, don't cause autism, the tests were bad, the methodology was bad, the person who did them recanted from the tests. You can say that the amount of vaccines together, you can find this on every subject. So let's bring it back to us, and bring it back to what I generally like to talk with you about, which is politics, geopolitics, Israel, and so on. So today, I want to talk with you about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and things that he's accused of, things that he's done or not done, and opinions of the motivations behind some of what he's done or not done. Many people, in fact, I've seen this in some of the YouTube comments for previous videos, say that Benjamin Netanyahu is a criminal and corrupt and is in court, and that he is prolonging the war in order to avoid the consequences of his corruption and his court dates and his coalition falling apart. And I'd like to take all of what I just said apart a little bit. So first of all, what are the accusations made against Benjamin Netanyahu? So there are about 4 court cases going on, and they're called the Thousands case, the 2000 case, the 3000 case, and the 4000 case. תיק 1000, תיק 2000, תיק 3000 ותיק 4000. And each one of them focuses on a different aspect. So one of them says that he received bribery from a business person named Arnon Milstein, and the bribery he received was cigars and champagne at a value of a few 100,000 shekels each. One of them says that the news website walla.co.il had bribed Bibi Netanyahu with favorable coverage in return for him passing or wanting to pass or pushing to pass laws that related to their competitor, Israel Today, that was run by Sheldon Edelson, who's since then passed away. I'll go back to the first one. That bribery was given so that Arnon Milstein would receive a diplomatic passport or something of that sort. The third one relates to the purchasing of submarines from a German company, ThyssenKrupp, that some say that someone close to Bibi Netanyahu received a hefty sum of money for having that transaction go through, and that the submarines were not needed by the Navy and were pushed through anyways. And there's a fourth one that I don't remember right now off the top of my head, because I will admit to you now, none of what I'm saying here is scripted. I haven't prepared anything. I'm just going with the flow, and the Spirit of God will guide me. So, I don't remember the fourth one, but let's go through them just briefly. So the first one, which is the bribes of champagne and cigars, in my humble opinion, is utter baloney. Because Mr. Netanyahu, 25 years ago, in between his prime minister candidacies, after he served in the late 90s, was being paid $50,000 an hour for a lecture in Harvard. A gentleman who was paid that much, and certainly that sum would have risen by now because he is, one, more prominent, and two, inflation, but let's assume that he only got paid $50,000 an hour for a lecture, means that in about 2 days he could easily, legally, make the sums of money that are being discussed as a bribery. Now, I don't know about you, but no moderately average intelligence person, and Netanyahu is accused of many things, but being dumb is not one of them, would risk bribery for a day's work. So to me, I find that these accusations of being bribed by a few 100,000 shekels when the gentleman receives 200,000 shekels, that's $50,000 for a lecture, is absurd. And anyone who thinks that there's any truth to it is also absurd. Additionally, of course, that's just my immediate motivation, but the proof in the case is falling apart as well. There's no, the witnesses are flaky, the evidence, the receipts are non-existent, and so on and so forth. The next case, the case of the positive coverage from walla.co.il for Benjamin Netanyahu. Well, first of all, let me say that the website Walla is left to far left. They are not in favor of Benjamin Netanyahu, and rarely ever, if ever, post anything positive about the gentleman. So it would be like saying that MSNBC, CNN, and Oprah were doing positive coverage of Donald Trump. It's an absurd accusation. In addition, let me add that the crime of a bribery through positive coverage did not exist, is not in the book of laws, and was only created for this case. The next one. Let's move on to the submarine. By the way, I'm not going to go into every single case, but if one were to look into it, you would see that the testimonies are all falling apart on the witness stands and just being torn to shreds. But anyways, the next one with the submarines, in theory, this is what, in a family discussion with a family member of mine who is not in favor of Benjamin Netanyahu, this has been the case that she said, this is the one that really caused problems. This is the big one. All the rest, I agree with you, Danielle, they're nonsense. This is the one that has harmed the state of Israel, and this is why I vote for Yair Lapid, who, might I mention, is a scarecrow and is still yet missing his brain. But in any case, this is the real deal. So, recently, it came to light that the actual person who approved the purchasing of these submarines, as recorded by the chief of staff in a conversation with, I believe, maybe it was the intelligence general, chief of intelligence, but maybe it was the head of the Navy, was that it was Ehud Barak, at the time defense secretary, and not Benjamin Netanyahu. So whether, first of all, there are those who say that it's a wonderful purchase and praise God we got them because they're protecting Israel. But let's assume that they weren't needed. Then it wouldn't have been Benjamin Netanyahu anyways. It was Defense Minister Ehud Barak who's the one who approved the supposedly unnecessary purchase. And again, I want to throw in another aspect into all of these cases and more, which is that the clerical bureaucratic positions in the government, the district attorney's office, the courts, are all operating in what one would call a deep state style, which is doing investigative operations that are not approved, that haven't been given a warrant, that no judge has approved, or if there is approval, it's based on a expert opinion that's all redacted and no one can do anything and the judge doesn't even have the knowledge to argue, and certainly the defendant doesn't. But in any case, it's all very shady methods that are used. But even with all that, the cases are falling apart. And yet, there are those who say Benjamin Netanyahu is extending the war in order to avoid his criminal problems. Or Benjamin Netanyahu is not willing to bring the hostages back home, is not willing to agree to negotiate with the Hamas. And again, this is again where I find the polarizing stupidity of different sides that are supposedly intelligent, educated people so frustrating. Because anyone with half a brain cell is aware that the Hamas is not interested in negotiating, is interested in the political turmoil in Israel caused by the left's protests against Benjamin Netanyahu, and that because they're not interested in negotiating, there is no one to negotiate with. So you can say as much as you want that Benjamin Netanyahu isn't willing to negotiate, but there is no one to negotiate with. There is no deal on the table to be accepted or rejected, and yet, every Saturday night, there's a protest out in the middle of Tel Aviv that Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't want to negotiate and doesn't want to bring the hostages home, and he's a terrible human being, and he's a traitor, and he should be killed, and so on and so forth. By the way, he's a traitor and he should be killed is, of course, illegal, but once again, I mentioned the deep state, so there is certainly a difference in how the law is applied if you are on the left side of the political map or on the right side of the political map. If you're on the left, you can do anything you want and nothing will happen to you. If you're on the right, you can do nothing and everything will happen to you. This might sound like crazy ramblings of a lunatic, but this is unfortunately what we in Israel are discovering as the truth. That 14-year-old girls were arrested and people were thrown in jail for half a year without even seeing a judge in 2005 when they opposed the disengagement from the Gaza Strip. And today, people are shooting Navy-grade flares, which means that they have a light-in fluid that's very powerful and usually used at sea where it's much more humid and there is an ocean for it to land in and it's not dangerous, and using them intentionally in riots. Or they are burning the Ayalon highway, which is the main highway running through Tel Aviv, and so on and so forth, and nothing happens to them. Because if you're on the right side of the political aisle, then, and by right I mean correct, not right-left, the correct side of the political aisle, then nothing happens to you. You can have a giant violent protest and be released the next day. But if you are on the wrong side of the political aisle, then the district attorney will hit you very, very hard. So, again, bear in mind, everything I'm saying, take it with a grain of salt. I wouldn't say a bucket of salt, but a grain of salt, because it's my opinion, and you need to form your opinion. And this is what I want you to do. I want you, in the comments, to do two things. First of all, any comments or questions about what we just talked about the polarizing difference of opinions and how it is that smart, educated people reach polar opposite opinions on pretty much every subject, is how can this happen and what your opinions are on Benjamin Netanyahu's court cases and on his agreement or disagreement to do a hostage deal. And while we're at it, we can throw in global warming. Let's hear your opinions. Our photographer Shmuel, who's behind the camera and is the main person who responds to your comments, will love to get all of your wonderful comments and opinions. And the second thing that I want you to do, and this is more important, is if you have any subjects, topics, questions, ideas that you want me to talk about, or that you want me to talk about with more people, with Pastor Yuda, with others, please write it down in the comments. Let us know. We would love to deal with some fun subjects that you guys have. And while I said there's only two things I want you to do, there's actually a third. As you know, the war is still going on, also in the Gaza Strip, also in Lebanon, and also in the 6 other fronts. That would be Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Iran, Judea and Samaria, and one more that slips my mind at the moment, not to mention the United States, the ICC, Europe, and so on. You know, there's plenty of fun everywhere. But I want you to, as you know, this is all still going on. We're still gearing up the troops. Just got a shipment of Leathermans and G-Shock watches for paratroopers. Got some helmets for the Yahalom unit. And I want you guys to keep praying, and interceding to protect the soldiers of Israel, protect the guardians of Israel. It is your job to pray for them, to stand with them, to keep them strong. And while you're at it, pray for the hostages to be released, pray for the families of the hostages, pray for the families of the wounded soldiers and the families of the soldiers that have died, and pray for the wisdom for the government. And God bless you all from Jerusalem.